Hi, welcome to Portage County Matters. I'm Patty Dreier, Portage County Executive. Great to have you with us in this new year. This is a time for resolutions. Folks having new starts or committing to new goals in their new year. And the one greatest thing we believe we're going to talk about in the show that you could make a resolution about, that any one of us as able-bodied people in our community can make a resolution about, is to be trained in CPR so that in the event that our loved ones or neighbors need our help in an emergency situation, in a cardiac arrest kind of situation, that we would be ready to assist them. And anyway, I want to welcome my guest, who's not the first time on my show here, but Dr. Mike Curtis, who's joined me again, an emergency physician at St. Michael's Hospital. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Patty. Nice to be here again.
You are a guy in our community, a doctor in our community, a leader in our community, works with a team of other people to make sure that we can give people the greatest opportunity to live after a cardiac arrest. And so let's talk about all these initiatives that we've undertaken, and really, truly, let's start with, what is cardiac arrest?
Well, first of all, cardiac arrest is when the heart stops beating, and oftentimes people will mistake that for a heart attack. In other words, the people sometimes use the terms interchangeably, heart attack and cardiac arrest, but in reality we're really talking about two completely different things. And many people have heart attacks without ever having a cardiac arrest, and not all people who have cardiac arrests are having or have had a heart attack. So the heart can stop beating for all kinds of different reasons, but a heart attack is really an electrical problem in the heart. So something goes haywire in the electrical system that makes the heart beat rhythmically, and that's a cardiac arrest. A heart attack happens when there's a blockage in one of the arteries that supplies blood to the heart, and the arteries that supply blood, if they become blocked, there's potentially the part of the heart muscle that would have been supplied by that blood now dies. Okay, so that's called a heart attack, and a cardiac arrest is when the electrical system goes haywire and the heart just stops beating.
I've been guilty of exchanging these two
Yes,
terms.
many people do. And then to complicate matters, you sometimes hear people say things like, well, he died of a massive heart attack. Okay, well, there is no such thing as a massive heart attack. It's a complete misnomer. You hear the term used quite often, actually, but the reality of it is what they're talking about is sudden cardiac arrest. A massive heart attack is sudden cardiac arrest, but it's just kind of a misuse of the term, and it doesn't help us because so many people get the two confused.
So how common is cardiac arrest in Portage County?
Well, we see probably about 42 cases a year in our EMS system where we do, the EMS responds and tries to resuscitate the person about 42 times a year on average.
Mm-hmm. So talk about that. I know when I attend the EMS Association banquet, as I did a couple of months ago, and we meet survivors, we have these phenomenal stories about the rescue, if you would, and the response, and how we brought people back to life, and now they're here to share their stories and be with their families and so on. But most of the public never hears those kinds of things. Dr. Curtis?
Well, it's a phenomenal thing. I mean, you have to understand, the over 400,000 people die from cardiac arrest every year in this country. It's the leading cause of death. And there are far more people who die from cardiac arrest than die from any other cause. And the truth of the matter is the survival rate once you have a cardiac arrest is really abysmal. It's nationwide, it's pretty low. So the fact that there are survivors at all is in a sense almost a miracle. And when you listen to the stories that lead to why they survived cardiac arrest, how we were able to resuscitate them, they're stories that are oftentimes just simply amazing. And as an example, there have been, I think in the last 2 or 3 years, probably, I think 2 or 3 different people who were driving their car on I-39 when they had a cardiac arrest. And somehow people were able to pull the car over safely, like the passenger in the front seat. They got the person out, and then passers-by who saw this happening stopped and rendered aid, performed CPR, and then somebody showed up with an AED and shocked their heart back into a stable rhythm. it's unbelievable that stuff like that would actually happen in the circumstances, you know, where you're driving down the road, you have a heart attack, and you essentially die. Somebody safely pulls your car over to the side of the road, and then a paramedic just shows up because he was driving by and starts doing CPR on you. How lucky is that?
No.
The stories are
amazing.
really interesting and phenomenal. The thing is, they don't all happen by accident, and the most important thing to say is, it's not an accident that these people survive. And when you look at the history of cardiac arrest survival in Portage County, many of the cases of people surviving have occurred because of things that we have done in the community that have made that happen. Like when I started here in 1992, only maybe about 2/3 of the geographic surface area of this county was covered by first responders. Today, it's essentially 100%. And you can even include the city of Stevens Point in that, because we've equipped all of our police squad cars with AEDs, and we train all of our officers to do CPR. Plus, the fire engines at the Stevens Point Fire Department also carry AEDs, along with a lot of paramedics. So if a fire engine arrives on the scene of a cardiac arrest before an ambulance does, you still have that first response capability. So essentially, the entire geographic surface area of this county is covered wall to wall with people who can respond in an instant with an AED and perform CPR. So we've seen cardiac arrest survivals in places that we didn't used to see them simply because of that. It's because we've designed that system. The other piece is public access defibrillation. Ever since about 1999, the state of Wisconsin enacted a piece of legislation that allows businesses to deploy AEDs in their workplace. Well, we've seen many cardiac arrest survivals that have come because of public access defibrillators being available and there in an instant.
So I was asking some questions before the show, and I understand that the number's around 250 AEDs placed in businesses in our own county here.
Sure, and that doesn't even take into consideration all of the ones that are deployed in police squad cars.
Public places like in our county annex building just down the hall from our
buildings,
office.
right? Public buildings, plus every squad car in this county has one. So Portage County Sheriff's Department, City of Stevens Point Police Department, and the Plover Police all have them in their vehicles. And then our first responder groups, we have 11 first responder groups that respond in the community, and 2 industrial first responder groups, all of whom are equipped with AEDs.
Now, we brought a sample along for those folks that are listening to us on the radio. We're talking with Dr. Mike Curtis. He's an emergency physician at St. Michael's Hospital. But also for those that are watching on television or are watching on video, we brought along an AED today. And maybe Dr. Curtis, just a little bit of articulation around what an AED is, and even a verbal about how to use it. It is so simple that even just hearing you talk about it, if they weren't able to watch you use it, would be a helpful thing, I think.
Well, sure. So the first thing is, of course, if you see or witness somebody have an apparent cardiac arrest, and you should just assume that that's what it is if you see somebody collapse. The first thing to do, obviously, is to call 911 or have someone else call 911. And the reason being is that our dispatchers in Portage County have been trained to be able to coach you through CPR and how to use the AED if you've never done it before. If you've never done either one before, the dispatcher can coach you. And there are studies that show that this dispatcher coached CPR is almost as effective as someone who just took a class within the last 3 months and is doing the CPR from what they learned in school. So it's a very effective way of getting people to perform CPR and to use an AED. Of course, the AED has to be available. The thing about AEDs is that they're terribly simple, okay? Yeah.
That's right. We often try to complicate it.
Right. The only thing you really need to do is to turn it on. And then once you've turned it on, the machine actually has voice prompts that tell you what to do. You know, to place the leads on the chest, and there are diagrams that show you which lead goes to which side of the chest. There's one that goes in the right upper chest and one that goes in the left lower lateral chest. And you know, these are easy things to do, but there's diagrams that show you exactly what you're supposed to do, and the voice prompts then tell you. And then it checks the rhythm for you, and it'll tell you if the rhythm is shockable or not shockable. And of course, if you've witnessed the cardiac arrest, then you just follow the prompts and it'll tell you, stand clear, push the button, shock the heart, etc. And then it'll tell you to resume CPR, you see.
So when someone is in the presence of an individual that collapsed and they get that 911 call made, just going back to that again, the bottom line is to not be afraid to follow whatever the directions are if you've got access to an AED or listening to the dispatcher. For we have these capacities, we've trained people on how to lead you through it. And then by that time, emergency responders usually arrive after you've begun your work, and then they take over and we'll go from there. And our survival rate in this county is extraordinary.
It is. It's really, it's an impressive number. Actually, back in January of 2009, we started measuring cardiac arrest survival using a technique known as the Utstein method. The Utstein method was developed many years ago by people who do research in this field, so that places, people in various locations around the world could compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges instead of mixing them all in different baskets. You see what I mean? And so people were able to measure resuscitation outcomes very precisely using this Utstein methodology. So in 2009, when we first had our first EMS coordinator, Michael Fraley, he began to actually measure this for us, and we've continued to monitor this and keep data on it until the present day. So that's how we know that our survival rate is about 40% right now. It's been kind of in that 40 to 45 range this entire time, which is impressive. And and we're talking about survival from what we call witnessed, shockable cardiac arrest. So in other words, somebody actually saw the person go down, and when they first applied an AED, there was a shockable rhythm present for the cardiac arrest. Not all of the rhythms are shockable. Nationwide, probably about 31% of all cardiac arrests are witnessed and shockable. So these are the people who have the highest likelihood of being able to survive cardiac arrest. And in our community, it's around in that 40 to 45 range. And of course, the actual numbers are going to vary from year to year because we have a relatively small sample size. But the thing is, nationally, the national trend is really much lower. It's probably closer to about 15% for witness shockable survival, and even lower than that for survival from all cardiac arrests. But the most important ones are the witnessed and shockable. A few years ago, there was sort of an effort to get people to think that 50% survival from cardiac arrest, out of hospital cardiac arrest that was witnessed and shockable, was the ideal goal for everyone to achieve. And so you can see that we're kind of a lot closer to that goal than a lot of other people are. By way of comparison, the truth of the matter is most people don't actually measure it at the community level. So most people don't really know what their cardiac arrest survival rate is. Fortunately, here in Portage County, we've been doing it now for almost 8 years, And
it's our countywide EMS that allows us to have this central hub of information related to our survival
exactly. And having
stats.
The EMS coordinator position has been helpful in that regard because it's allowed us to track this as sort of, in a sense, a quality measure. I mean, it's not the only way to measure the quality of our EMS system. There are certainly many other ways, but it's certainly an indicator of how we're doing, not only in our EMS system, but in our community in general, because it's important to really understand this, that, well, let me put it to you this way, okay? A few years ago, the folks in Mesa, Arizona, reported that they had achieved a 60% survival rate from cardiac arrest. You see, so, and the people in Seattle, Washington tell us that they're hovering around that 50% mark, okay? So we think that we can do a lot better. But you understand, as good as our EMS system is, and we do have one of the finest ones in the entire state of Wisconsin, there's absolutely no doubt about it. This countywide EMS system of ours is truly a jewel.
You bet it is.
Yeah. And, but the thing is, EMS can only do so much. And There's a survivor in our community who's done a lot of work, David Glenicki, telling us about, telling the community and going out in public and talking about this. And he likes to talk about how his cardiac arrest occurred at Adventure 212 while he was riding an exercise bike. And fortunately for him, there were people there who knew how to do CPR, and they had an AED on the premises, and they shocked him back to life. And as he sat up and woke up from this cardiac arrest, he looked around, and in through the door walks the EMS service guys, the paramedics. You see, the thing is, if we're going to extend this or push the envelope in terms of our survival, if we're going to raise the bar even higher to 50% or even potentially beyond, what we need to do is get the community involved in this, because EMS can't do it all. And especially when you talk about the rural areas of this county, if you're in, let's say, the village of Amherst, well, you have an ambulance service there, and EMS providers, the first responders, Rosholt and Almond and Bancroft and places like that. But once you start to venture out into sort of the rural areas beyond those little villages, suddenly you have longer response times, and it takes people longer to get there. So having citizens who know how to do CPR that can help a family member or a loved one, a relative, whatever. So that's really helpful if you can learn how to do CPR. And businesses, if you would put AEDs in all the businesses in the community, but businesses, government buildings where people gather in large numbers, and civic groups, sporting events, things like that. As a community, if we all had this consciousness that we needed to have AEDs on our premises, we would save a lot more lives. If you look at UWSP, for example, they have taken this they have really set the bar for the community, if you ask me. Because almost every building on that campus has at least one AED in it. And there's an army of people there on that campus who've been trained to do CPR. Some buildings have 2 or 3 AEDs in them.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's a great thing. But if you're going to have a cardiac arrest on the campus of UWSP, you stand a pretty good chance of surviving it.
So for those of you listening on the radio, we're talking with Dr. Michael Curtis. He is an emergency physician at St. Michael's Hospital, and we're talking about CPR, saving people's lives, AEDs, and New Year's resolutions. If you're not trained, if you have never been trained or your training needs to be refreshed, it's time for you to look at a possible resolution in your own life about a commitment to get yourself trained so that you'll be available to save somebody's life should there be a cardiac arrest that you witness where someone makes a fall and you're able to be the first on the scene and have the chance to give them a new life, a new day.
There's a lot of advantages, I think, to people taking a class in how to do CPR, because you learn things about the heart and even your own heart health, which is good.
Let's talk about where. Let's talk about where, and then also the CAST, the Cardiac Arrest Survival Team, CAST, C-A-S-T, at the St. Michael's Foundation, so that in the event that somebody's listening on the show, to the show right now and wants to be able to contribute toward helping us raise funds so that we can place more AEDs out in our community to be available for response to our loved ones and neighbors in our community, that this would be a great way for them to give.
Well, I think, first of all, there's 2 major organizations in the community who do CPR training, the American Heart Association and the American Red Cross. And I think if people want to contact either one of their offices, they'll find out where they can take a CPR class. As far as the CAST is concerned, first of all, one of the things that we did back in 2012 is we started this organization known as the Cardiac Arrest Survival Team, or CAST. And it's sort of a quasi-subsidiary, if you will, of the Portage County EMS Oversight Board. And just like they have something called the technical team, which is technical advisors who advise the oversight board, we kind of created this team called the Cardiac Arrest Survival Team to sort of give advice about how to improve cardiac arrest survival. And one of our goals in doing that was to actually set a survival rate of 50% for our community. And we think that we can achieve that someday. We don't know how soon or how long it's going to take, but it's certainly a goal. I personally believe we can go higher than that, but I think hitting the 50% mark would be a great milestone. A great milestone, exactly. So in addition to the cardiac arrest survival team, we did a number of spin-off things, and one of them was to create the cardiac arrest survival team fund in the foundation at St. Michael's Hospital so that people could donate money to help support cardiac arrest survival in our community.
What's an AED cost?
An AED costs, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1,100, $1,200. If you purchase them through the Portage County Emergency Management Office, that's probably about the best price. But there's all kinds of different AEDs out there, and depending on how sophisticated you get with them, they may cost more, you know, and it all depends on the manufacturer and things like that. But they're not terribly expensive, and I think they're certainly affordable for a lot of businesses anyway. It's just making the commitment to put them out there and deploy them in the community. It's sometimes a little bit difficult because I think there's a lot of mystique around them that people just are uncertain about, you know, whether there's liability and all that kind of stuff. But it's important to do. But so the thing that we've done with the money that we've raised from the CAST fund is we've actually purchased AEDs for churches and civic organizations. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the number is it's around 15 so far since we started the fund about 3 years ago.
Congratulations.
That we've deployed in the community to various churches and organizations like that. So we're using those funds to help others purchase AEDs, and so it would be great if more people would donate to that. And they can just simply go on the foundation website and find the links to how to do that if they're interested.
Do you know what the length of time is now for CPR training? We were doing all the training last year with this competition with folks just north of us and out of Marathon County, and I remember going and getting retrained. That evening was maybe an hour and a half, I think.
Sure. Well, the thing is, it depends on how much you take, how much CPR training you actually take. You can take an entire basic life support course where they'll teach you adult and child and choking and all those kinds of things.
I remember all of those in the past. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And some of those classes might take upwards of 4 hours to do. And they'll lead to certification. They'll hand you a certificate at the end from the American Heart Association or the American Red Cross that says you've passed this course. The thing is, that's not totally necessary for all people to do. And I think it's a good thing to do for certain types of people. But for the general public, if you simply learn how to do hands-only CPR, it doesn't take very long at all to understand that. And you can do it within probably an hour or so. The truth of the matter is, if you were really interested, you can just Google it and they'll show you how to do it online.
That's right.
And it's not difficult. All you have to do is put your hands over the center of the chest and just start pumping, okay, about 100 times a minute, and right in the middle of the chest, 100 times a minute, and push hard, push deep, push fast, and don't stop.
And it just keeps that blood flowing when the body isn't able, or the heart isn't
right, so the heart's
not
pumping. Mm-hmm. The heart's not pumping, but the moment you hit the floor, there's as much oxygen in your blood as there was the last moment you were standing. You see, the problem is it's no longer circulating. So if someone pump on your chest 100 times a minute, pump hard, pump fast, don't interrupt, okay, and let the chest totally recoil between compressions. You do that 100 times or more per minute, and you will circulate enough oxygen through the body to keep the brain alive and the heart alive. And when somebody arrives with an AED, if the rhythm is shockable, they just shock the heart, and the idea is the heart should start beating again on its own. Now, sometimes we have to do this several times before it finally works, but that's the trick. And honestly, as much as, you know, we've sort of celebrated the concept of paramedics and the medications they can give, and Johnny and Roy and all those things that they used to do on 911, you know, TV show, it all looked very thrilling and exciting. What we've really learned is that surviving cardiac arrest just comes down to two simple things: good chest compressions and an AED. That's all you need: electricity and compressions, and more people can survive.
Let's talk about a survival story or two, a little bit more. You've talked about David before, and I remember having his story. I sat next to a survivor at the EMS Association banquet, and his wife And hearing his whole story, oh my goodness, that there's nothing quite so powerful as that.
Yeah, well, you know, and it's really, there's so many of them. I'm not sure which one I would start with. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, one of my favorite ones really of all time, and I won't mention names, but there's a gentleman who lives in the town of Sharon who survived cardiac arrest. He was in a pool league, and they were at a tavern where the guys were playing pool one night, and he had just arrived and was just about to start his pool match when he had a sudden cardiac arrest in the town of Sharon, okay? Well, a year or two prior to this, we didn't have first responders in the town of Sharon, okay? And he survived because one of his teammates knew how to do CPR, and they called 911, and the first responders from the town of Sharon showed up with their AED. Within 4 shocks later, he was alive again. And I remember working that night. He was my patient, but I remember working that night in the emergency department, and we were just like totally swamped at St. Michael's. And I heard this call go out, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, not another major case coming our way tonight. And then I thought, oh, it's in the town of Sharon, and they're sending the ambulance from Station 2 to this because the other one's out and it's busy. I thought, that guy probably won't survive. Well, lo and behold, like 15, 20 minutes later, we're getting radio calls coming in from the town of Sharon. We have a survivor,
Oh,
you know.
wow.
So,
I just got goosebumps at
yeah.
the show when you just
So,
said that.
Right.
Oh, my goodness.
But he's alive, and he's living a very nice life. And the following spring after this happened, one of his daughters sent me a picture of him sitting in front of his birthday cake with all of his grandchildren surrounding him. And I thought, we hit the nail on the head. There's another man.
Gosh.
There's another great story, and this one he probably won't mind me mentioning his name, but his name is Warren Zander. And Warren is the father-in-law of Janet Zander, who many people remember from the Department
You're
of
making me
Aging.
cry, Dr. Kerr. Stop. It's
But
beautiful stuff.
This is a great story because Warren used to own a restaurant in Rochelle called the Coffee Cup. And one day he, many years ago, like 1997, 98, was sitting there having lunch with his son Al, who was a first responder in Rochelle. The Zanders
Al's
are
a good guy.
a famous first responder family from Rochelle, and their Al's son now, Matt, is one of our paramedics with Stevens Point. So, but Warren and Al's brother were having coffee together, and Warren had a sudden cardiac arrest. Well, Al ran out to his truck, got his AED, came in, shocked his dad. Warren's alive today. And Warren, I think, just celebrated his 80th birthday, and that was like 1998 when that happened. And few people probably know this about him, and he might be embarrassed for me to say this about him, but this is a man who has done tremendous things for our community since he survived cardiac arrest. And one of the things that he does, which is truly remarkable, is that he drives people all over. Like if the veterans need a ride to Madison or Toma to go to the VA,
sure.
he's driven people
provide
to
aid to
Chicago
others.
to get to hospitals and clinics in Chicago. He's driven people all over the place. Hundreds of thousands of miles he's volunteered to drive people who don't have a ride to get to places that they need to go to, like doctors' visits in faraway places and things like that. He's a volunteer of the First Order and a man that I admire tremendously, but the contribution he has made to our community, he would not have made had he not survived that cardiac arrest in 1998 or whenever that was. It's a wonderful story.
Thank you so much, Dr. Curtis, for all you do to save lives here in Portage County, and I encourage everybody who's listening to get out there and get trained in CPR so you can save lives too. Thanks.